Well, hello, and a very warm welcome to you wherever you are around the world. Thank you for joining us at the Dublin Bowie Festival. My name is Nicholas Pegg. I'm the author of a book called The Complete David Bowie, and I'm delighted to be joining you for this year's Bowie Festival. Now, as I'm sure you know, this year marks the 50th anniversary of one of David Bowie's best-loved albums, universally acknowledged to be one of his masterpieces, and with tracks like Changes, Quicksand, the Bewley Brothers, Queen Bitch, Oh You Pretty Things, and of course that monumental classic, Life on Mars. Well, it's not exactly hard to see why Hunky Dory makes regular appearances in the lists of greatest albums of all time. So to celebrate this milestone, the half century, I'm delighted to say that with me today are two gentlemen who back in 1971 were right there in the room playing key roles in the creation of Hunky Dory. Playing piano on the album, Rick Wakeman, and the producer of Hunky Dory and many more Bowie albums besides, Ken Scott. Thank you both very much for joining us. It's wonderful to have you here. Very warm welcome to you both.
Good to be here.
It's great to be here. Great to see Ken again as well.
Yeah,
well, I was about
to say,
this is a real reunion for the pair of you, isn't it? We've just been chatting just before we started, and tell us how long it is since you last saw each other.
I would say it's over 40 years, isn't it?
It is over 40 years. I was just trying to think if we did anything together afterwards. We did quite a lot. I did quite a lot with you before, David.
My recollection is the last time we worked together was the first track you recorded for your first solo album.
You're dead right.
We started it off at Morgan, I think.
No, we started it at Trident, and then I couldn't get any more time at Trident.
The other way around, okay. Because
that's what it was, yeah. Because without buttering you up, so whenever I did sessions at Trident, I always asked for you.
Wow.
And the thing was, you did a track which ended up as Catherine of Aragon.
Right.
Yeah, but we gave it you may remember there was a lot of tapes that were going missing at the time from places and appearing on Sunday on, and so you had to give it different on the boxes were written different names a lot of the time. Okay. If you remember that going on, and This was initially called Handle with Care, although it was always meant to be Catherine of Aragon. We did that, and I just couldn't get any more time at Trident.
Right.
And so I ended up at Morgan to finish it all off.
Because I seem to remember, at least the last session at Trident, you had at that time a big American car.
That's right.
You parked it on Wardour Street, and you took up 2 parking spaces because of the parking meters. Now, we were working through the night.
Yeah.
And you suddenly realized about 8 o'clock in the morning, oh shit, I've got to put some money in the parking meter.
That's
Only
right.
You'd already got 2 parking tickets because the traffic warden said you were taking up 2 parking spaces.
That's absolutely correct. It was I'll tell you a bit about that car because it does have relevance. It was a 1957 Cadillac limo.
Wow.
And one of the original owners was this is clever. I just can't remember. Clark Gable.
Oh wow!
I shipped it. Well, it was bought for me by Jerry Moss at A&M Records.
Okay.
I'd seen it in a parking lot on Sunset Strip for $850. And Jerry bought it for me, shipped it back to England. It did 3 miles to the gallon.
Yep. I can imagine.
It weighed 3 ton, and you're right, it took up 2 parking spaces. And you're quite right, I did park it there, and it did get a minimum of 2 parking tickets. And I was told that they would have towed it away, but the tow truck wouldn't tow it.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. That was the car that I came up with. You're dead right.
Amazing.
See, memory does work to a certain extent. There are lots of things I don't remember, but...
It's interesting. You were just saying just before we started, Ken, that it's going to be interesting, given that the two of you haven't got together for such a long time, your memories of what we're going to talk about are bound to be, coming from different perspectives and different angles. So this is going to be a really interesting chat, I'm sure. So look, for both of you, your earliest work with David Bowie, just before we get to Hunky Dory, had actually been a couple of years before and on exactly the same project, the Space Oddity single back in 1969, also at Trident Studios.
Sorry, I didn't work on the single.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
That was done by Barry Sheffield, one of the owners.
It was Barry Sheffield and Gus Dutton, of course, that's right. Yeah, was on that. So Ken, you did engineer the rest of David's Space Oddity album with Tony Visconti, didn't you?
Some of it. There was one of the other engineers, Malcolm Toft, and I were going between tracks kind of thing on that. Yes.
Right, right. So you were both on that album because Rick, you were playing Mellotron on Space Odyssey. You also, as we talked about in our other chat, you did some keyboards on a couple of other tracks, Wild Eyed Boy from Free Cloud, and
Yeah.
So Ken, if I can just stick with you for it, you had already notched up at this stage a fairly impressive CV of engineering, hadn't you? You had worked with a little known quartet from Liverpool prior to your work with David Bowie on Magical Mystery Tour, I think, and the White Album. Is that right?
Correct. I was assistant engineer for the Beatles from side 2 of A Hard Day's Night through Rubber Soul.
Right. Wow.
Then promoted to mastering, which back in the day was called cutting, and then promoted and finished off Magical Mystery Tour because Jeff Emmerich, the engineer, had gone on holiday or quit or something. So I finished that off. Then also once again after he quit on the White Album, I took over, and I think I must have done about 2/3 of it.
Right.
And
right.
then before Hunky Dory at Trident, I did All Things Must Pass.
George Harrison's solo album, and you'd done one with Jeff Beck as well, I believe, hadn't you? Around about the same time.
Album Truth, yeah, at Abbey. That was at Abbey Road or EMI.
Yeah.
Procol Harum, A Salty Dog.
Yeah. So you had a really impressive list of credits under your belt. But again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Hunky Dory was your first time actually in the producer's chair. It was David who gave you your sort of little push in that direction and said, right, this is your time has come.
For both of us. It was, I'd reached a point that a lot of engineers get to. You're sitting there and you come up with this idea. I always use the story. I think that a herd of trumpeting elephants will sound perfect under this guitar solo. And the producer looks at you quizzically and he said, well, let's give it a try. So we bring in the herd of elephants, we record them trumpeting, and then we get them out. And if it worked, it was the producer's idea. If it didn't work, it was only Ken's idea anyway, but I thought we'd give it a try. And that happens enough that you eventually want to have a little more say and fall or rise from your artistic decisions, say. And David had come in to produce Freddie Beretti. And we'd already worked on the 2 albums before on Space Oddity and Man Who Sold the World. And I told him that I wanted to move into production. He just said to me that he had just signed a new management deal with Jem Toby, and they wanted to put him into the studio to record an album so they could shop a deal. Mm-hmm. He was going to produce it himself, but he didn't know if he was capable of doing it. Would I co-produce with him? And that was it. We went in and we learned together.
Great. So yes, the credit that David put on his sort of little handwritten notes on the back of Hunky Dory says produced by Ken Scott, assisted by the actor, I believe that's the phrase he uses.
Yes.
It's a very nice way of putting it. I'm assuming then that David's role in the co-producing was very much on the sort of artistic side of the spectrum. And you were the person whose job was you were the man at the desk translating what David wanted into reality because you knew how to make everything happen. Would that be fair?
Yeah, to a point. One of the things was always trying to keep one step ahead of David because you never quite knew what he might suddenly want to put on. We were only working 16 track then. It was not like it was, or it is today, where infinite number of tracks. Back then we had 16. So if we were at 15 tracks and he suddenly wanted to put the Philharmonic Orchestra on it, then we were in trouble. So you always had to keep one sort of ahead of him.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you mentioned Freddie Beretti a moment ago. In the lead up to Hunky Dory, so we're talking the first half of '71 here. David was writing incredibly prolifically. The songs were just coming and coming, and yeah, he recorded various tracks with various sort of friends and acquaintances. Freddie Beretti, Mickey King, people like that. Tracks that are legendary among fans. Tracks like Rupert the Riley and Lightning Frightening and things like that. And you were actually in on some of those and producing and engineering those as well.
Engineering, just the Freddie Beretti one.
Yeah. So things were kind of starting to come together, and at some stage in the spring, David called up Mick Ronson, who had gone back to Hull after The Man Who Sold the World, and said, come on back down, and Mick and Woody came, and along came Trevor Bolder, who was new to the Bowie lineup, but he'd already played with Ronno, which was the sort of Mick Ronson's group before that. So they all came, they moved into David's house in Beckenham, I believe, and it's round about this point, Rick, that David got back on the phone to you as well and said that your services were required.
Yeah, we've come round for tea, actually, really. And we didn't meet anywhere else because, of course, he just had the little baby, and so he was sort of glued to the house somewhat. I just wanted to add something that that Ken said, which is so true. I did so many sessions back in the 60s, of which many Ken engineered at the time, and I have seen firsthand on many occasions the so-called producer say, not sure what we want here, and for either one of the musicians downstairs or Ken or whoever the engineer, probably they were good engineers, would say, well, perhaps we could do this, and the producer would go, yes, okay, let's do that. And then if it was successful, Ken's quite right, producer would take all the credit. And often you hear in interviews going, yes, well, we needed something, and I thought, yes, maybe what it needed was that herd of elephants. And I'm going to go, this is ridiculous. I think Ken would agree that a lot of the time, some of the engineers that were around in the 60s, late 60s, were far more qualified to be producers than the actual producers. And the ones that turned out to be the best producers were ones who fully understood the desk, who'd been great engineers. But going back to your question, I got a call from David who said, come to Beckenham. And I went down in the afternoon with my wife. Sounds awful, my wife at the time, my first wife was, and she just spent time with Angie, and they played Babies. And David and I, we went straight to his piano, beautiful piano. I remember it really well, except I can't remember the make. It was on sort of like a minstrel's gallery in the house, and David came out with this battered old 12-string, and he said, I'm going to play you some songs. I said, okay. He said, make as many notes as you want. So I had some manuscript paper and paper, and he played these unbelievable songs one after the other on this horrendous 12-string guitar. And I remember saying to him, why are you playing it on this guitar? This is probably one of the worst sounding 12 strings I've ever heard. He said, I know, it's awful, isn't it? And I said, well, why you do it? And he said, well, if it sounds good on this, just imagine what it will be like when proper instruments are on. He said, too many musicians and songwriters fool themselves by writing on incredible sounding guitars and or keyboards, whatever. He said, and actually what they're listening to is the instrument, not the music. So he went on and played me all these songs and said, he said all the previous albums have been very much coming from the acoustic guitar. He said, I want to go this album to be quite piano heavy, a piano being quite a catalytic instrument for all of the things. So he said, I want you to make a load of notes and think of a lot of them as piano pieces. Certainly Life on Mars, he said, think as a piano piece, how you would play it. And I just sat in awe of these one by one, these fantastic songs just get coming up. I mean, I think Ken would bear me out that when you got booked to do an album, whether you're engineering, producing or performing, there might be one, possibly two standout tracks, and the rest would be okay and some fillers. I'd never heard a batch of songs where every track was a standout. It was just that some stood out even more than others. There wasn't a weak link on that album in any way, manner, fashion or form. And he'd got Mick and Woody and Trev rehearsing downstairs in the basement area. They were playing away. And he wanted the musicians to, shall I say, 75% know the music, not 100%. David did say to me, the last few percent, 25%, happens in the studio, when you realize with what you can do in the studio, you can take it that one stage further. I mean, he never wasted any time like that. And I can remember that going that particular day in Beckenham incredibly well. I truly can. And I remember driving home with my wife, and she's saying, "What are the songs like?" And I did say, if it turns out as David wants it, it could be one of the greatest albums of all time. And I know people say, "Oh, you say that in retrospect." I'm not at all.
If I can just jump in there. So I'd done the 2 albums with David before, and my attitude towards David was a sweetheart of a guy, obviously had a certain amount of talent, but a superstar? Yeah, I'm not sure. And so when he asked me to co-produce with him, I thought, ideal, I can get to make all of my mistakes on an album that no one's ever going to hear. So then, I'm not sure if it was probably after he'd met with you, Rick, or maybe before, he, Angie, and Bob Grace, his publisher, came round to my house.
Yeah.
And once again, it was Angie was off with my first wife. Only according to my first wife, Angie was chasing her around the room.
Can I just say that I didn't mention that before, but that did actually happen.
Right.
Not an uncommon occurrence, apparently.
But we started to go through these recordings, demos, to find the songs for Hunky Dory. And it must have been 1, maybe 2 in, just suddenly that huge light bulb went off at the top of above my head, and it was, oh shit, here I go again. This is going to be amazing. Everyone's going to hear every mistake I make, kind of thing. So yeah. I was suddenly terrified.
It must have been quite exhilarating as well for both of you to hear this, as you say, this extraordinary set of songs. I can't imagine sitting there on one day and just hearing those coming out for the first time. Wow.
I think for me, it made it that much scarier because they were so good that I mustn't mess them up for him in any way, shape or form. And I think both David and I went in there with a certain amount of trepidation because neither of us had produced before, really. But as we were putting things down and as Rick was playing his heart away and things like Life on Mars, it was all coming together so well that I think it gave us more and more confidence to take things that much further. And,
it was a good team. The band was good. I mean, Mick loved David's stuff, of course, as well, as did the others. So did I, and we all wanted to do our very, very, very best for this album. And I think we did. There was no throwaway takes or I mean, there was good banter and things that are going on, but it was a lot of everybody wanting to do their level best for this.
Yes. One of the things that we
David, and yourself, Ken, I think you got that. I mean, you upstairs and us downstairs. I think you did get that we were taking it very seriously. In fact, I remember there was one track, although I can't tell you which one it was, where the band were making a few mistakes here and now and then. And David went, or it might have been you, sort of went, look, let's leave this, and to the guy said, look, we'll get back to Beckenham, practice it tonight, and then come back and let's see if we can, if you know it better, we can play it better. But there's no point in wasting time now because we're never going to get it. But I can't remember what the track was.
Well, I was looking at the paperwork for this a while.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I was looking at the paperwork for this a while ago, and I didn't know whether this is the one you're talking about, Rick, but certainly I can tell you that Song for Bob Dylan, which is on the second half of the album, the first attempt at that was right near the beginning of the sessions in June, and then it wasn't actually nailed. The final take of it was done in August on practically the last day of the sessions. So maybe that one.
It probably could. I remember it was pushed to one side because David didn't like wasting time in the studio. If it wasn't going to be right, I remember him saying to me once that if it's not working, it either means that people haven't learnt it, it's not being played properly, or there's something wrong with the song that it needs looking at. So there's no point in just trying to bluster your way through. It could well have been that. It could well have been that track. But I remember because I didn't have anything else to do particularly that day, and it was in the afternoon. And I said, well, we're going to do something else. So no, it's too late. We've got, I think Ken and David had stuff to tidy up on the tracks already done. And so I was summarily sent home in the big American car with another parking ticket.
With another
Well, that was one of the things with David. He got bored in the studio very easily. So everything had to be quick. And I think I often say David was the most amazing vocal presenter in the studio. Of the 4 albums that I co-produced with him, I'd say that 95% of the vocal tracks were the first take from beginning to end. I would just get the level, hit record, and what he did that one take through is what we hear today. And when you've got someone that is that good, I can understand him getting very bored and upset if musicians aren't getting it right in the studio, because he nailed it every time.
Yeah, it's an incredible talent. But yes, it must have been quite, you had to be on the entire time to make sure you caught take one. And yeah, absolutely. But that's an incredible, he was an extraordinary vocal sort of technician, wasn't he? I mean, he knew exactly what any particular song needed, the level of it, the type of timbre of his voice. He could change it to suit the song, and the number of times he nailed it on take one is just extraordinary.
I mean, I can really empathize with that. I mean, I used to hate having to do loads of takes. When you did, sessions for people would, and they go, oh, and the producer would go, well, let's do it again, let's do it again, let's do it again. You couldn't say anything. You said, go, why? I'm only going to do it exactly the same as I did before, and it probably won't have the same feeling as it had on the first take, or maybe the second take if there was something I corrected. And the number of tracks that I played on over the years, which certainly was spoiled by the number of times that it was played, they become tired. They become going through the motions. And there were some producers that were a nightmare of that. Oh, if it's a 3-hour session, let's use up every second. I'm not saying it because my friend's here on that, but Ken was certainly unlike that. If you nailed it, you nailed it.
Yeah, yeah. No need for endless safety takes and extra ones just in case.
We made decisions back then. We didn't keep the takes. So it was, if you've got a great take and now let's do another one, you'd probably go over that great take.
You'd probably wipe the first one. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That raises the stakes even more, doesn't it? So you've both mentioned Trident Studios and just off Wardour Street. It's in St Anne's Court, wasn't it? I think. It's a legendary place for Bowie fans, and of course for fans of many other artists who work there, because it was very much a happening studio at this point, wasn't it? I wonder if you can paint a picture of what it was actually like, because although it's this legendary place for fans, a lot of people, it's just something that exists in their imagination. So there we are off Wardour Street, but can you take us through the door? What actually, did you go up some stairs, down some stairs? What was it like in there?
Do you want to go, Rick?
Okay, I'll start off and you can tell me where I go wrong. Well, you go up in St Anne's Court off of Wardour Street, which was also known as Annie's Crag. It was there was quite a few, shall we say, other entrances in St Anne's Court, which led to some working people in the evenings.
Generally females, yeah. Yeah,
generally females, yeah. Who we all got to know because we all ended up in the ship or down in one of the cafes, and they go, "We got a busy night, Rick?" And they go, "Yeah. Who are you in with?" "Oh, I'm in with David Bowie." "Oh, fantastic. How's your night been?" "Oh, reasonable." You sort of left it there. But you'd walk through the door in St Anne's Court into Trident, and there wasn't really a reception area at all. You turned board to the right and then into the control room, so you went in at such, and the desk was just up on a little plinth on your left hand side. There's some seats down the front, and that's where, and then you could, whoever was engineer or whatever producer could look through the glass down. The studio was down the stairs, so you came out, went down the stairs into the studio, and if you turned back on yourself, there was a sort of a drum booth area. But then in the studio, there was no marked off rooms or anything like that. There was certainly soundproofing barrier things, whatever you like to call it, put around. And then there was the wonderful old Bechstein piano that was there, which I loved. And it was, so what was really good was when you arrived, and there might be a few musicians just milling about in the top area, you'd all go down. And it was when you went down into that room, it was like okay, now we're ready to play. Which was, it was a lovely room to work in. It really, really was. The sound was good. Excuse me. The piano was just the right age, hammers just the right worn, and it has to be said that the engineers that worked there, Ken in particular, I have to say, because I did so much piano with Ken in there, knew just how to mic a piano. I mean, pianos these days are mic'd up pretty much the same way everywhere, but Trident had a particular way of miking up this Bechstein, and it was unique, and so many producers who were using piano would wait weeks and months to come in and use the Trident piano. I did a load of stuff there. Elton John did some piano there. I did the organ, in fact, when Elton did Mabbin Across the Water. But you know, I did some great fun piano work in there, working with Al Scott and other people, Al Stewart, I mean, and other people like that. It was just wonderful. I love playing that piano. There wasn't another piano in London even close to that. That Trident piano.
And it's worth saying, perhaps, that, you know, for all the reasons you've just said, that instrument, that particular piano, is a close contender for the most sort of star-studded piano in popular music history. I've got a little list I've jotted down here. Obviously, we know that it's on Hunky Dory, so it's the piano on which you played Life on Mars and Quicksand. It's the piano on which Mick Ronson later played the piano for Lady Stardust, and it appeared on the Lou Reed album, and so on and so on. But in addition to that, the Beatles had used it. That was the piano on which Hey Jude was played. Elton John's Your Song, Harry Nilsson's Without You, Queen went in there, Killer Queen, and Bohemian Rhapsody, even, that piano. And I Don't Like Mondays by the Boomtown Rats a bit later on. It goes on and on and on, all played on that instrument. It's quite remarkable. I don't know what became of it.
Well, there's at least 8 places that claim to have it.
Yeah.
But as far fetched as America, to hear Dubai, I've heard. I regularly get things. I've got the Trident piano, and I go, oh, have you? And they go, oh yes. The interesting thing was, it was rented. It wasn't owned by Trident, and it was a lot of people think it was a Steinway, but it was a Bechstein, and it was put up for auction originally for I believe for £100,000, and it didn't sell. And then it vanished for a bit, and nobody really quite knew where it went. The interesting thing is, the company they rented it for no longer exists. Nobody knows the serial number. So without the serial number, it's impossible to know whether it was the same piano or not. It's very possible that one of the 8 or so that have told me they've got it, it could be one of those. But on the other hand, it easily could not be, because there were about a few hundred produced of that particular model. So if anybody can come up with a serial number and match it with a piano, then I truly think you're quite right. They're sitting on gold. It's a museum piece.
Well, there is one other part to the story, which I got it secondhand, but I do believe it. And that is that at one point, the piano was being moved out, I think to be restrung or something. And as they were carrying it up the stairs from the studio, it got dropped. So the sounding board got cracked all the way through it, and they tried to put it together again, but it never quite went back the way it was.
That's very feasible. One of the things that made that piano so amazing was just the way that the strings had worn, the way that the hammers and the felts had all worn.
Yeah.
If you restring a piano, it's never the same.
No.
It's never the same. So even if they had managed to restring it, they could never have brought it back to what it was. It was a period of about 2 or 3 years where it was absolutely quite unbelievable, and unbelievable to play as well. In fact, I'm a big Bechstein lover. I've got one in my music room just round the corner. Absolutely love them to bits. I still think, for recording purposes, a good Bechstein, an 8-footer or a 9-footer, is better than a Model D.
What an amazing...
It all comes down to age, though, doesn't it? Because when they're new, they're too round. There's not enough edge to them, and it needs to be worn in.
Well, they were all different when they. I mean, I've got a 1919, a 1935, a 1920 something, and back then they were all different because they were all hand built.
Yeah,
and they all had slightly different tones and slightly different ways of playing and weight on the keys, and that was different. They're now all too much the same. And when you consider you can pay, 150, 160,000 pounds for a 9-foot piano these days, I wouldn't want mine to sound exactly the same as the guy who's bought one next door.
Right.
But things have changed. But for me, given the choice of the studio, I do love the large Becksteins.
Yeah. Jumping back to the original question about Trident, what it was like.
Oh yes, the course.
Yeah.
One of the things for me, not so much the building or anything like that. I come from EMI, Abbey Road, which was so staid. It was, the management was all sort of just after the war. Everyone, all of the engineers had to wear suits and ties and all of that kind of thing. You had the amp room guys, the tech wizards going around in white lab coats. And it was cold, but still amazing stuff came out of it, no matter how cold it was. But then you go to Trident and people would go there just to hang out. Musicians would just hang out there. And Phil Collins was there all the time, kind of thing, hanging out. And it had such a great atmosphere compared to what I was used to. So there was that. One of the problems for me, Rick said about the couple of stairs going up to the control room.
Well, there was another room above it as well, wasn't there?
Oh, there was a tea room. Yeah, well, they had they eventually put the mixed room the next floor up, and then there was a cinema to show, because Wardour Street was very film oriented.
Yeah.
They wanted to do more film work, so they had this small screening room upstairs, and then there was the kitchen and tape library above that. But the two stairs leading from the reception area, the small reception area, up into the control room, the number of times I know, for me and several other people, you'd be really excited about something. You wanted to go down and talk to the musicians really quickly, and you jump down the stairs and smash your head on the door frame, because it was set for ground level, not for the two steps. So God, how I didn't suffer a concussion from some of them.
Do you think sometimes that might have had something to do with the fact that the ship pub was on the corner?
That has a little to do with it. But no, the drum booth was underneath the control room.
Yeah.
So otherwise it was very much, I think I also liked it because it was very much like number 2 studio at Abbey Road, which
you're right. Yeah.
It's been my second home, and very much like Olympic, one of the studios at Olympic, where it's the control room's on an upper level and you're looking down on the musicians.
Yeah.
And that was always great because you always felt that amount of power. You just push the button. No, you didn't get it. Now, come on, boys, do it. And you're up there down on them.
Yeah, a good comparison.
It was, a lot of musicians didn't like having to go down the stairs come up from the studio, up the stairs, through reception to go into the control room to listen to something. Then you go back out through the reception area, down the stairs to the studio to do another take. It wasn't the best designed in that way, but boy, did that studio work.
I think I understand what you're saying about up and down the stairs. I suppose that's what we had in common to the girls we used to meet in the ship at night. But the thing was that if you were going to come up to have a listen, and I'll tell you something, Kev, was really interesting. When you were like a session muso, one of the things it was when there was a playback happening, the session muso was, you stayed down in the live room. So occasionally, when you were granted the honour of, would you like to come up and have a listen? I mean, that was fantastic because it gave you a chance to have a listen. You obviously didn't interfere with that, but when you were doing sessions with people like David, whatever, because it wasn't what I call a fixer session where the fixer would put in loads of it, you were invited to go up and have a listen. And it did make you feel a real part of it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, you were part of the team, so it's if you're looking at a recording session as a team, which that very much was.
Yeah.
You're going to come up because you are part of the team. Unlike when it's just straight session work, when it's just a bunch of musicians, it's the team isn't there, kind of thing.
Yeah. And when Rick and I spoke before, he was explaining to me, very much with the Hunky Dory sessions, it wasn't a case of an overdub here and an extra bit there. It was very much the band all together, you know. I mean, obviously there's going to have been overdubs and things and tweaks and changes, but when you were actually laying down the main tracks, it was all kind of live. Yeah,
to a point. Just thinking of Life on Mars, that was Trevor, Woody and Rick only. And in fact, I did a new mix of Life on Mars a couple of years ago now, which was just trying to keep it to the piano, the orchestra and David. Mm-hmm. And we ran into a problem because there was a certain amount of leakage from the drums picked up on the acoustic piano. But luckily, someone I knew that at the time worked for Abbey Road, they'd come up with this computer software that could get rid of things. And it was done specifically for the Beatles, to, going back to their early recordings, which were 4-track and that kind of thing, so they could separate instruments to do better stereo mixes.
Yeah, people have been trying to get rid of drummers for years. Yeah.
But I called on him and sent him the piano track, and he managed to get rid of all but 3 snare hits.
Wow.
From it. And luckily, those 3 snare hits happened just when David is doing something important vocally, so you never really notice them.
Wow.
But no, it was amazing. So I could do that mix, which we couldn't have done without that software.
Wow.
That's
amazing. Is that available?
It was.
Yeah, it came out a little while ago as an extra thing. It was on the 5 years box set, wasn't it? I think, is that right? The one that came out.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Not sure.
I'm the guy who ought to know, and I'm not sure. But no, it did definitely come out.
There have been so many reissues with different things.
Yeah.
You need to lose track.
Yeah. Now, something you touched on just briefly there, Ken, which we definitely need to talk about. You mentioned the orchestra. Now, on the previous couple of David's albums, the string arrangements and orchestrations had by and large been handled by Tony Visconti, who had expertise in that area and was producing those albums. On Hunky Dory, it fell to Mick Ronson, who had, as far as I know, never really done anything like this before. So it was quite a step off the brink for him. But boy, he came up trumps, didn't he, with those string arrangements?
Absolutely. I think it was a first for all of us in so many ways. And I have this firm belief, rightly or wrongly, that the reason that David chose to work with me as co-producer, I worked on the 2 albums with Tony and David. And Tony is, I want to say dictatorial, but he was the bass player, he was the producer, and my feeling is that he had more input to the first 2 albums than David did. David wrote the songs and all of that. And the only success David had had before that was on Space Oddity, which was Gus Dudgeon, who worked in a completely different way. And I'd learned from Gus and from George Martin, they both work the same way. Talent is put into the studio for a specific reason, and you have to allow the talent in the studio to create. That's what they're there for. And I don't, my feeling is that Tony didn't quite, he would tell them more what to do. You might have some input on this, Rick. And Dave, because David, I think a lot of the Space Oddity was in David's head, how it should be. And Gus had allowed that, whereas it didn't happen from then on. I think David needed to prove to himself that it's put up or shut up. Either my ideas are going to work, or I've got to give it up, kind of thing.
It's an interesting thing though, because
work with a producer, co-producer, that would allow him that freedom, that wouldn't say, no, that's not going to work, we're not even going to try it, kind of thing. It's that herd of trumpeting elephants thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing was, as you know, Tony and Gus initially both used to work out of the Regal Zonophone offices in Dumbarton House, which was Denny Cordell's place, of course. And
Essex Music, wasn't it, as well?
Well, Essex Music was just across the corridor.
Oh, okay.
And Denny had been given the offices on the other side for Regal. He had T-Rex, and he brought Joe Cocker down from Sheffield and things. And the first bit of money that came in to fund Joe Cocker came from a single by the Joy Strings, which was the Salvation Army who had a hit, and that funded a lot of the stuff that Denny did. Bright boy, Denny. I liked him a lot. But Tony and Gus were good friends, as you know, and they would interchange well. And Tony who actually said to me about Space Oddity, because he called me about the Mellotron thing to come down, and said, I'm not producing it, Gus is producing it. And he told me, if my memory has served me correctly, when I arrived, Tony said, look, this song, it's a great song, but I don't really get it, what it's got to, how it's got to be. And I just felt that Gus could put it down, get it down much better than I could for what it is. So I've handed it over to Gus to do. Now, and that's my brain's playing tricks. I think that's pretty much what happened on that.
Interesting, because I thought you already knew Gus because you were with the Strawbs at that point.
I did know Gus, yeah. Oh, yes, I knew Gus. Yeah. I knew Gus, and I knew Tony before, because Tony had produced a couple of one of the Strawbs albums that I'd been, in fact, on two of them, one Dragonfly, which was just before I joined, and afterwards. Plus, I did lots of other stuff for
you did Junior's Eyes with Tony as well, didn't you? Just before
Junior's Eyes, I did. Tucker Zimmerman, although that might have been Gus. But there was a lot. I did a lot of sessions for both those two guys, and they were different in the way they worked, and they got results.
Yeah.
They did get results. Gus, certainly, if I've got the story right, I'd probably have to check with Tony, but I'm pretty certain that Tony passed it across to Gus to do.
Yeah.
And did a great job too.
Yeah.
What Tony has said in the past is that he didn't quite get Space Oddity. He thought it was out of step with David's other writing at the time, and he thought it was a bit of a gimmick, almost like a novelty song about the moon landing or something. And Tony sort of felt it wasn't. He just didn't get it. He was happy to do the rest of the album, so he kind of did a deal with Gus and said, "Well, you do the single and the B-side, and I'll do the rest of the album."
So my mind's not playing tricks then.
No. It's exactly what you said, really. Yeah, that's what it said as Tony tells it. But I think, Tony, who has now, of course, renounced this view long since and admitted that he was wrong. But at the time, he said he didn't really like Space Odyssey. He thought it wasn't a very good song. And of course, as soon as he heard it, he thought, "What on earth was I thinking?" But yeah. There we are. Yeah.
You hear the demo of Space Oddity, and it's very close to the way it finished up.
Is it really? Yeah. I didn't know that. Oh wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, he's already using the stylophone and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's that sort of the main vocal with the countdown in the background. It's almost like a sort of Simon and Garfunkel song or something like that, isn't it? Maybe even the early Bee Gees or something like that. It's got feel to it.
Ken, you'll know this. Correct me if I'm wrong. The stylophone. Did David buy it in a confectioner's shop in Wardour Street?
That I don't know.
I think it was. Again, I'm not sure. David, I'm sure this is right, but I could be. David was coming up Wardour Street, and there was a demonstration and sales thing of the stylophone by Rolf Harris.
Yep.
And David went in and bought one and brought it up to the studio. I'm sure I'm not making that up. I'm sure it's.
I've got ads, paper ads of Rolf Harris and talking about it, and then David eventually went on to do ads for it as well.
Yeah.
I've also Ken, got something in the back of my head that there was a bit of a bet going on between, it could have been David and Mick or one of the guys, for a $5 that he couldn't get it onto Space Oddity. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it sounds feasible.
No.
Because it just comes in, it's one little bit as a standalone, and I can sort of imagine David doing it and going, $5.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's right. I'm sure, as a lot of the other things that have come back, thanks to you two guys, you've sort of said, yeah, no, you're on the case there. I'd like to think that stylophone thing is correct and that David got his $5.
Yeah.
I think it may very well be. It sounds just about right. David did say that he was first introduced to the stylophone by Mark Bolan. That was the story that he told, but that doesn't mean that that's the one that, you know, he may well have still had to buy the one from there. So both of those stories work.
Well, that's because Mark, of course, was in the same stable up at Regal's on a phone.
Yeah.
He was up there, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So, yeah, I'm going to drag this back to to a question I asked a while ago, which is great. This is all wonderful stuff. But yeah, I want to talk a bit more about Mick Ronson and his orchestrations on this album, because yeah, when you listen to those orchestral parts on, of course, on Life on Mars, but also on Quicksand and Fill Your Heart and all sorts of tracks on the album. For someone who'd never really done that before, they are amazing, aren't they? I mean, how did you? Trevor and Woody have told the story in the past that that Mick was really quite nervous about this, because, you know, the sort of proper grown-up classical musicians were going to come in and have to play this stuff, and he didn't know whether they were going to turn their noses up at it, as it were. And I mean, do you remember much about this?
Well, I look at it very much like the Beatles. It was they didn't have the musical knowledge to create what they did, and I look at Ronno the same way. It's, yes, he had a certain amount of knowledge, but it was how to use that. And no, he was brilliant. There was always this thing with Ronno where apparently the night before we were due to do an orchestra, he would be working on the parts and he'd fall asleep. He'd come in about 10 minutes before the session's supposed to start. The string players are all coming in, they're down there. And on the first floor, following the stairs that go down to the studio, you go up a floor and there's a toilet there, where he would always go running up the stairs, lock himself away in that toilet, and he'd come out about 10, 15 minutes later with a huge grin on his face, with a stack of musical notepaper, and go down and hand it out. That's where he would always finish his arrangements. And
Wow.
We never quite figured out what that grin was, whether it was something happened in the bathroom or whether it was because he finished the parts. But that was the general way it worked with him for the arrangements.
I was never there for any of the orchestral sessions, but the one thing I will say is that a good orchestrator or arranger for any track is a man who understands the track.
Yes.
And understands the song. That's what makes a good one. Otherwise, you just get somebody who's just knocking out parts. They can be nice, but they're not right.
Yeah.
Mick knew David's stuff inside out and backwards. And I think that's what made it work so well, because he sort of sensed what was needed. And when I listened to them, as I say, I wasn't there, so I couldn't have. But listening to them, you go, yeah, he got it. He got the sesh. He got the music. What it was meant to be. I'm sure if he hadn't, David would have gone down another route.
Yeah,
I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier on, though, Rick, as well, about you know, David having asked you to, you know, base the songs around the piano, and then the band would take it from there. What Mick Ronson did with those string arrangements, I mean, on Life on Mars, on Quicksand, which I think is one of the most beautiful arrangements on the it not only just goes well with the track, but it specifically complements so beautifully your piano part. The way that the strings and the piano interlace on Quicksand is just heart-stoppingly beautiful, I think.
Well, Mick Ronno as a player was not your average guitar player. Your average guitar player, if there's room for 100 notes, will try and fit in 150. Mick played where it was needed. He didn't clog things up. Which meant that he was a listener. He listened to what else was going on. I mean, the number of times he'd wandered over to the piano and go, "What are you doing on that bit? What are you doing on that?" And because it's the end result that's important. And I think Mick, unlike a lot of players, understood that was the end. It was the end product that was going to count. So it was very important to know what the other musicians were playing and what they were doing.
Yeah.
I was lucky my father was a great piano player, and he taught me from early day on. I remember doing a rehearsal in Straub's days, and I came home from the rehearsals, and my father said, "How did you do it?" I said, "It's great." I said, "We learned everything in an hour." He said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "So you know what everybody else is playing then?" I said, "No, but I know what I'm playing." He said, "So if it goes wrong, what do you latch on to pull it back? I said, well, I don't know. And my dad said, rehearsing is to learn what to do when it goes wrong, not what to do when it's right.
Yeah.
And it's important that you know what everybody else is playing.
Yeah.
And Mick was one of those people. He knew what Woody was playing, what Trevor was playing, and he knew what I was playing. And then often or not, after we'd run through in the studio piece, either one of us I might change a little bit because there's something that Mick did I really liked. I thought, don't want to block that up, and vice versa. I would have loved to have done a lot more stuff with Mick, because I think we could have worked, well, had a lot of fun together, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the other things was that one of David's most amazing things was he knew how to pick teams to give him what he was after. And once he picked the musicians for that team, he would just let them get on with it. He didn't tell you specifically, I want you to play this here, that there, this here. Very rarely did he do that. It was, this is the song, now play what you think it needs, kind of thing.
I said earlier, I was talking to Nicholas, and I said that one of the things was quite interesting, that when David played me Life on Mars on the acoustic guitar, and he said, oh, just play it on the piano for me. And I said, how do you want me to play it? And he said, you know how I want you to play it. I said, no, I don't. That's why I'm asking you. He said, just play it. So I played it. And he said, that's how I want it.
Yeah.
And that's when he said to me, when you come to do your own albums and things, Rick, he said, really important that you pick musicians and people around you that know what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
He said, you can pick the best people in the world, but if they don't understand what you're trying to achieve, you'll never get it.
That's it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excuse me.
So everyone's got their own favorite tracks on Hunky Dory. As you've both said, I mean, there isn't a weak link there at all, but I thought it might be quite nice to, if we just take a little trip through the album, so that everyone's favorite track will get mentioned eventually. So the album starts, of course, with another classic that we haven't really talked about very much yet, actually, Changes, which has a great piano part for you, Rick. It has it showcases everything about the band, actually, doesn't it? Woody plays some wonderful drums on it as well, which we haven't really mentioned Woody's work on the album very much yet. David on saxophone as well, of course. It's an all-round terrific album opener. Ken, do you have any particular recollections of how that song came together in the studio?
How it came together? No, I know that it as an engineer, it changed the way I worked completely, because when it came time to mix, now we were 16 track, and the way it had always been up to this point, there'd be me, the producer, assistant engineer, maybe members of the band, and we'd all be mixing together. It was almost like the musicians playing the mixing console. We all had to get it right at the same time to come up with the mix. But suddenly, David never came to the mixes. He got bored. So he wouldn't come to the mixes. Quite often, I wouldn't even have an assistant engineer. It would just be me in there. So how could I make the changes that used to happen with a group of us? And so I started off mixing in very short sections. And one of the things on Changes, I wanted a different piano sound on the verses, I think it was, to the choruses. One of them I wanted much harder, and the other one I wanted much smoother. So I would do a section and I'd EQ the piano so that it was harsher, get that. As soon as I got that bit right, I would then change the EQ, do the next part, and just moved on through that. And I continued that. I had to do it for David's work, but I continued all the way through, even when there were lots of other people around, still did it the same way in sections. So that particular song completely changed how I worked for many years.
That's really interesting. So when David came back in to listen to your mix, once you'd done it, what would tend to be, would he just go, yep, or nope, no. or would he, what would he?
Generally speaking, he didn't come back in and listen.
Oh, really? Right. So he was
just saying it's a management company, and David and I never discussed.
Yeah.
What it was. I just went through the whole thing. Well, if I get asked to do the next one, he must have liked what I did.
Yeah.
But also, in fairness, Ken, in the same way that he trusted musicians, he wouldn't have put you in the job if he didn't trust you to do your job. Leave you to it. I mean, David did tell me that he, in early days, he never went to mixes. I don't go to mixes of my albums. I started to go to a few Yes mixes because a lot of them were so bad, but I in general, I don't go to any of my mixes, whatever it is. because interestingly enough, when I get to hear it, that's the closest I'll ever come to hearing the music for the first time.
Yeah.
And so, and it's easier sort of nowadays because with everything being automation, if there is the odd tiny little thing like a trumpet note sticking out, I can point it out, and that's a 5-second fix. It's easy. But it's so much better to be able to hear a piece finished for the first time, because that is the closest you'll ever get to hearing it.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, yeah. So after changes on the album, we come to, I was about to say one of my favorites, but they're all my favorites. I love them all so much, but Oh You Pretty Things is such a lovely song. Rick, we talked about it a little bit in our other conversation about how you and shared out the piano tasks on that.
Yeah.
David played the sort of the verse parts while he was singing in that almost sort of aria, sort of recitative way, and then you took over for the choruses where it's a lot more sort of upbeat and on the beat. It's a fabulous song. It's one of David's sort of glam classics, I guess, isn't it? Kind of early glam entry for him, pointing the way towards some of the sounds on Ziggy in a way, but very piano led.
You think?
Yeah. Do you know, or is it just me?
No, I don't see it leading into Ziggy. But
yeah, I mean, obviously it's got instrumentation wise very different, but I'm hearing it. I'm hearing a kind of glam rock sensibility starting to show his head. Yeah, okay, well, maybe that's just me. An interesting thing about that track is, of course, that by the time you recorded David's version for Hunky Dory, it was already a hit for Peter Noone. The version that had been farmed out, I think Tony DeFries had sent some of the demos around, and Mickey Most had picked up on this one, and who was producing Peter Noone, who'd just recently left Herman's Hermits. So that version actually went into the charts in around about June, I think, 71. So effectively was the second hit that David had ever had, really. Space Oddity had happened a couple of years before. So in a way, you were recording a song that was already a known...
It was the most unlikely of covers.
Yeah.
I mean, it really, it's, you know, that's almost as bizarre as the Crank is covering a Whole Lot of Love. You know, you would never mix those two together.
Yeah.
But somehow it worked without being at all detrimental to what David did with it.
Yeah, yeah. The Peter Noone version is a bit softer, isn't it?
And it was a weird one. I think what saved it not being, so I won't say it's ridiculed at the time or people scratching their head, was the fact that Peter had left. Herman's Hermits had finished. They'd gone. If it had come out under Herman's Hermits, I think we might have been in a bit of trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's interesting the way the memory works and timing and all that kind of thing, because the way I remembered it was that the Peter Noone version came after we'd recorded it. But it's...
I must admit, I thought so as well. But
yeah.
But I bow to superiority.
Yeah, no, yes, the Peter Noone version was recorded in March, actually. So one must assume it was one of the very first songs from Hunky Dory that David had written, because it was the demo was going around as early as February that year. The Peter Noone version, which David did actually play keyboards on, was recorded in March and released, I think, in April, and it was on Top of the Pops, and it was peaking round about the time that David played at Glastonbury, which of course he did that summer, just towards the beginning of the Hunky Dory sessions, end of June 71. And Oh You Pretty Things, David performed among his set at Glastonbury that year, and it was pretty much the one song in his set that the audience knew, because it was because Peter Noone was in the charts with it. But yeah, I think we can safely say that David's version takes the laurels out of the two.
Yeah. I go along with that.
Yeah. And after Oh You Pretty Things, we come to possibly the most sort of overlooked, underappreciated track, the rather lovely, rather strange 8-line poem. And was this another one that David took the piano on, Rick, or was this one you?
Can't remember.
I'm with you on that one.
Remember. Some people think it's me. Some people think it's David. If it is me, great. If it's not, I'm not grossly upset. It is an underlooked at track, really. It's not, and it's a great track, but it's the album has, the whole Hunky Dory album does have a problem, is that it's all so good. How on earth do you really give everything credit it should have?
And 8-line poem is like a tiny little piece of cement between these two great, I mean, you know, the big one is on the way in just a moment, isn't it? So
it's more polyfiller really than
yeah. And Mick Ronson plays some quite interesting, it's almost like a sort of country and western type guitar sound on that one, Ken. Was that talked about in the studio? Is that, you know, that was what was the plan?
Just, I heard the song and we went for it the way it seemed to fit.
Yeah. So. And that one, of course, leads into the track that everyone loves, "Life on Mars." What can one say? I mean, obviously, it's become one of David's signature songs. It was actually, now this was one of the last tracks on the album to be recorded. The sessions went on and off from June through to the beginning of August, and this one happened right towards the end. And Ken, there's lots of debate over the years has happened about what happens at the end of Life on Mars. There's so much to, let's begin at the end. There's that amazing play out with those timpanis and everything, and then we hear a studio telephone ringing, and then we hear what might possibly be a slightly colourful response from Mick Ronson to the telephone.
Am I allowed to swear?
I think that's allowed.
Okay.
They can always beep you if not.
What happened? I said earlier about how if we didn't have the take, we'd go over it and erase it. So I think we started, and there'd been a couple of breakdowns. We'd get so far and it wasn't happening, and I'd stop, and I didn't go back because it just seemed to, that would have broken the field, taking the take back at that point. So we just continued, and we reached this take, which it was going amazingly. It was so good. Rick was playing his heart out. And suddenly, just to the side of the piano was this door, which led to a toilet, and in that toilet was a public phone, which was there basically for session musicians, so that they could call in the tea break or whatever to find out if they'd got a session that afternoon or that evening. There was no number written on it. No one knew the number, but right in the middle of this take, someone got a wrong number and called in, and it was picked up on the piano mics, and I stopped it, and it was Ronno was what is it? Yeah, listen. Fucking bastard, and a couple of other obscenities after that. And at that point we'd stopped, so I just took the tape back to the beginning of the reel and started to record again. Well, the next take that we got was complete, and it was the one. We'd forgotten about that other take until we came to put the orchestra on, which I think was probably the last thing we did. And part of Ronno's arrangement was that the strings at the end just sustained for some period of time, and I was just going to fade them out. Well, the strings are sustaining, and suddenly we hear this piano the start up, and we hear the phone ringing, and we just thought, oh, we've got to keep that. But of course, because of the BBC, I had to get it out before, fucking bastard. No, it's, now the funny thing is, when I did a surround sound mix of Ziggy, but we also, because of Life on Mars claim to fame, we also did a surround of that as well. And whilst I was doing these mixes, a Radio 1 DJ came by that's very much into Bowie, and at some point he wanted to hear it, and at some point he gave me a CD that he'd put together of covers of David's songs, and he said, oh, you got to hear this, they're so funny. And I have to admit, most of them I had just listened to the first 10 seconds and thought, oh god, no, this is rubbish, and move on to the next one, until I came to the cover of Life on Mars. Now I've no idea who did it, but they had tried so hard to get it exactly the same as our version of it. And it came to the end, and somehow or another, and that fade out, as opposed to what Ronno had actually said, they got something like, I feel like a glass of water. Okay. And it just broke me up. They had tried so hard, and then they got that last bit so wrong.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Actually, if you listen on a bit, after I feel like a glass of water, you would have then heard, oh, fucking bastard, we haven't got any.
Yeah.
I feel like a glass of water should now become the official Bowie fans sort of expletive. We can all just shout when we drop things on our toes and things. Terrific. Now, so Life on Mars, it's, of course, like the rest of Hunky Dory, it wasn't an immediate hit. The album didn't actually, for a very short period of time, it looked like it might not be heard by very many people because it didn't really rise up the charts until the Ziggy Stardust album was a success. So about a year later, and it actually ended up going higher than Ziggy in the charts, but not until 72. But at the time when you were recording it, obviously Life on Mars has now become this sort of, the monolithic track on this album. Did you single that one out at the time? Did you think this is going to be a real classic, or was it just one of many at the time, or is that impossible to say now?
Well, it's easy for people to say to me, oh, you're looking in hindsight and retrospectively, of course it will, through rose-tinted glasses. But yeah, I did. I mean, I spoke to people after we did it, musician friends of mine, and said, I've just played on a track that is just going to become legendary. And so I've got actually good friends who can actually put their hands and say, yeah, Rick did say that. There was something about that whole album and the whole team, as Ken said, that was together. And I did, hand on heart, feel incredibly honoured to be a part of that team, a part of that music, and a part of something that I truly believed. And as I said, I did say to people at the time, was going to outlive all of us. And it will.
Yeah.
And the wonderful tracks just keep on coming, because after Life on Mars, and we're still nowhere near the end of side one, we come to the wonderful Kooks. Now, you mentioned a while ago, Rick, that David's son, of course, had just recently been born, and this song was written within hours of the birth of Duncan Zoe. So there it is. It's a beautiful, sweet thing. Another beautiful string arrangement again from Rono. But the thing that's perhaps marks this track out as well is that Trevor Bolder, wonderful bass player as he is, picks up his trumpet for this track. Was that something that, did David know that Trevor played the trumpet, or did Trevor volunteer the information, or do we? Yeah. It's a great little. Of course, there's a line in the lyric about a trumpet, and then suddenly we hear it starting to tinkle, and just a wonderful moment.
I wasn't there. I wasn't there when that was actually recorded, so I'm sure Ken will be able to tell us that.
Yeah, no, it's unfortunately. Hey, it was 50 years ago. Let's face it.
I remember everything.
Our memories aren't quite as good as they were back then. But we never expected to be talking about these things in 50 years.
No.
And if we'd known, we would have been taking copious notes all the time. I remember this for an interview I'm going to do.
In 50 years' time. Yeah.
And it's that things just happened.
Yeah.
A lot of it wasn't planned. You just
you're right. And a lot of things with musicians. I mean, I remember doing stuff like the great Herbie Flowers, bass player. They suddenly announced it on one session with somebody that they were looking for a tuba. He said, "Oh, I play the tuba."
Yeah.
And you play? Oh, great. Okay, that's fine. I mean, I did clarinet on a couple of Yes tracks, because I did clarinet at the Royal College and that as well. People did tend to go, "Oh, I could do a bit of that." Richard Hudson in the Straws, great sitar player. When I think on one track somebody said, "Oh, it'd be nice to have a bit. Anybody know who plays sitar?" And I said, "Well, I do." And that's what sort of happened. And I'm sure to some extent it must have been that Trevor went, "Oh, I played trumpet. I was in the Boys Brigade or something," and away you go.
Yeah. And so bringing side one to an end is another of the what to me feels like one of the really great sort of core tracks of this album, Quicksand, a terrific song, a terrific lyric. Ken, I was reading in your book, you explained very interestingly how you got David to do several passes on his acoustic guitar, which you then sort of layered up for the final mix. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Just when we were laying it down, because it's a lot of it to start with is just David and the acoustic. And I just saw these moments of getting bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller. And so I just had him go down, and there was the original acoustic guitar, and then I had him do 4 other tracks. I just had this idea of, it starts off just David and the acoustic center. Then it comes to a part where it suddenly opens up to two on one on either side. Then comes back to one, I think, then maybe three, and finishes up just a wash. Yeah, I guess I was thinking maybe of All Things Must Pass kind of thing, the acoustics on that. And just, yeah, and David, always being the true professional, hey, I want you to do it 4 more times. Oh, okay, sure. And he goes down and does it. And his fingers must have been hurting by the end of it. But yeah, no argument whatsoever. And then I bounced them all down to 2 tracks, the way I wanted it to be, and continued from there.
Yeah.
But
have you ever seen, many years later, in the 90s, David came back to that song and started performing it live after, I think he performed it a few times around about Ziggy period, but after that, it didn't go back into his repertoire for a good long while. But in the 90s, he used it as a show opener during his Earthling period. Okay. And very true to what you've just described. He came on, it was just David and his acoustic to start, and it was just him. And what a low-key way to open a show for someone who by that stage was a megastar. Yeah. And then the band gradually came on one by one and joined in, and the bass and the drums, until it was this enormous thing at the end of the song. It was just a beautiful song to open a show with, and such an unusual choice, but how wonderful that he came back to it after all those years.
Yeah, well, he's one of those performers that he could do it just him and an acoustic guitar. It's like his doing My Death. Yeah. It was always brilliant whenever he did it. And Port of Amsterdam was amazing, just him and acoustic guitar. So it's he was amazing.
Yeah, amazing stuff. And then flipping the album over onto side 2, we begin with Fill Your Heart, which is the cover version on Hunky Dory, originally from Biff Rose's album from a few years before. Rick, you were talking about Biff Rose in our other conversation, and how David had obviously latched onto him and played you his very quirky, very strange album. And this was the song that he'd picked out. He'd already had it in his live repertoire for about a year before that. He played it at a BBC session the year before, just on his acoustic. But it's one of the tracks on which it's distinguished by a really amazing, if I may say so, piano part by you. You're kind of helter-skeltering up and down the keyboard. It's exhilarating to hear.
Yeah, it was great fun to do. And I suppose to some extent, the track felt, probably not the right word. I was going to say a little less precious, because it wasn't David's. Mm-hmm. So I almost felt, well, Biff's not here, I could have a real crack at this. And a lot of the time, as sort of Ken's adhered to in earlier things with leaving musicians to do what they like, you would do something that you felt could be really good or a bit different. And then if the artist or the producer didn't like, they'd say, can you think of something different there? But if they didn't say anything, you thought, well, hold on a minute, when we run through it again, if I do that again, if they like it this time, then I'm on a winner here. And so that's pretty much what happened with that track. I went a bit nuts, and it seemed to go down all right, so it stayed in. Yeah, it's wonderful. It obviously hit the right spot with David, because again, the existing surviving paperwork shows that Feel Your Heart, it was only quite at a late stage that it was decided to put that on the album, rather than it displaced another track called Bombers, which was recorded during the sessions, which eventually came out as a bonus track, But yeah, Bombers is a fine song. But yeah, Feel Your Heart just feels just right on that.
You think?
You're not so sure about? Oh, look, I'm the big Bowie fan. I think they're all fine songs. Okay. Bombers is a funny one. It's a bit vaudeville, isn't it? It's a little bit. It's very tongue in cheek. It's kind of like a sort of joke Neil Young song almost, or something like that. Yeah,
but it's that thing of David was prolific enough that we could go in and record 14 songs, and if a couple weren't working, we could dump them, and we'd still have enough for the album. We weren't pressured to make songs work when they weren't working, because we always started off with more. Maybe Bombers should have been called Bummers. I don't know.
And another also, if it just didn't fit the album, I guess that's the other thing. Which again, another track recorded during the Hunky Dory sessions, which found its home on the next album, was It Ain't Easy, isn't it? Which fits much better on Ziggy than it does on Hunky Dory, really, doesn't it? I think So that was a good call as well. But yeah, the closing strains of Fill Your Heart with that sort of beepy saxophone from David at the end leads into another bit of this sort of, like we saw at the end of Life on Mars, some sort of strange studio horseplay going on as we go. Now, is that your voice, Ken, saying this is Andy Warhol and it's take one?
It is, of course, yeah. But that whole thing, that was, I think, take one. And once again, we knew immediately, oh, we've got to keep that. So whenever I take the tape back, we'd keep that and record. I think it was take 4 was the final, was the master. And we tagged it on, and we wanted something underneath it. So Trident had bought this ARP synthesizer, a very large ARP synthesizer, and I'd spent some time, there were 2 of us there, David Henschel and myself, spent time learning how to use it. David was much better than I was, but I knew enough that I could get this thing going in the background, and did it, and everyone seemed to like it. So we kept that in there underneath the talking of it's Warhol, not what? Yeah,
it's Warhol. yeah, it's wonderful. And of course at the end of the track as well, there's the sort of ragged sort of round of applause as well, which feels like the song is bookended at both ends because it's the song about Andy Warhol. It almost makes it an exhibit in the album in a way, in a funny sort of way. That I'm hearing the people who made the album kind of talking about the song at either end of it. It's rather marvelous.
Well, those claps. That toilet that was by the side of the piano, that's where we recorded the claps. We wanted something slightly liver than the studio. So I can't remember who it was that went in there. It would have been David and Rono, and maybe Woody and Trevor went in there and were clapping. And it was just, we tried it a couple of times. And the thing with clapping on records, someone will always go off and everyone will finish up laughing.
Yeah,
well, that happened a couple of times during it. So I think this was, we managed to get through the whole song without that happening. And that was why the applause at the end, suddenly, oh, we've made it, good.
I can't believe nobody flushed.
Yeah.
It's the sort of things that musos do.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I guess we should just mention the actual song itself in between those effects. This is a bit of a tour de force. This is Rono on guitar as well as David, of course, isn't it? They're playing together, and later live they would do this as a sort of, they'd come up front and sit on stools as a kind of like a little acoustic interlude in the Ziggy shows, and just do it as a kind of a two-hander on guitars, and it's a beautiful sound that they make together, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, it's Rono.
yeah. He was. I mean, he was a. We've talked about his string arrangements. We haven't really talked as much about his guitar playing. He was a stupendous guitarist by any stretch of the imagination, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was a great guitar player. For reasons I've said before, he knew when to play and when not to play.
Yeah.
And very, very few guitarists, even the great ones, have that ability to be able to go, I don't need to play here. This says everything without me playing, or maybe just needs a few notes or a chord or something, as against, right, I've got to go for it now and play 3 million notes.
Hammer it to death. Yeah.
What made Mick so great? He was a listener.
Yeah.
You know, he really was. And when I used to go for a drink with him, sometimes we would talk about who was playing what clashed, what wouldn't clash, what would do, and it was quite unique. He got a lot of credit in his life, which just came across in the film, the DVD that was made about him. But I think during his lifetime, he never really got the accolades that he truly deserved.
I don't think David would most certainly have become huge. I don't know that he would have broken the way he did without Rono being a part of the team. Rono was such an important part.
Yeah,
it was very much, as well as the notes that he played. It was knowing what to do. David and I would be telling him what we need here is, and he'd say, "Don't worry, I know." And he'd go down and he'd play exactly what we were thinking without us ever actually.
Yeah.
Amazing, and that's something that no amount of money can't buy that. It was just the right, just at the right time. What you all needed. Yeah. Amazing. On the next track, there's a song for Bob Dylan. Rono plays it's a very sort of soulful, and as you said, actually quite a minimal guitar part, but very, it gives the song a huge part of his character, that sort of don't know what the word is. Actually, I'm going to use the word plangent. There we are. But yeah, he plays a beautiful, beautiful guitar line on that one. And it has another lovely piano part as well, sung for Bob Dylan. I think it's quite an underrated one again, but it's again feels like it's just in the right place on the album. Very noticeable, of course, that the second side, it starts with the cover version, which is kind of a tribute to Biff, and then we have a tribute to Andy Warhol and to Bob Dylan. Yeah. So David had recently been to America, hadn't he? And he'd come back and he had all these ideas fizzing around in his head about and various sort of people that he was inspired by and wanted to pay tribute to like that. It's a very David thing to do, to sort of stack them all up on the second side of the album like that. Yeah,
second side syndrome, it's called.
Second side. Yeah.
But it's right. You know, it has its own story, that the second side of the album, that front, and also the tracks that you just mentioned, especially the Bob Dylan one. Again, it's a great example that you don't need to play a million notes to make a track sound good. Yeah.
And talking of tributes, the next track, I've often sort of thought and observed that there's always a track on any David Bowie album that is the sort of signpost to the shape of things to come. And Queen Bitch on this album is clearly, I mean, I was saying earlier on about Oh You Pretty Things, but this is the real glam track on this album, isn't it? And kind of for the first time we hear Mick Ronson playing with that sort of turbocharged style that we then hear again on Ziggy Stardust and Aladdin Sane. It's another tribute. It's very much influenced by Lou Reed, who Bowie had been very taken by since he first heard the Velvet Underground. That's a really exciting track. It feels like it feels very immediate and very live. Did it go down quite quickly, or did it take a few goes?
It would have been.
As I said earlier, 50 years ago. Sorry, I honestly can't remember whether it. I really can't. It's 50 years ago.
Yeah, my feeling, I don't remember specifically, but knowing David and getting bored, it was always very quick. So quick.
Yeah.
It's again became a live favourite, and David played it indeed played it with Lou Reed at his 50th birthday concert many years later, which was wonderful to see. But yeah, that in a way it's the least representative track on the album. It's the one that sounds most like it's looking in a slightly different direction, but coming just towards the end of the album, that's rather good. It's like and now I'm going to take you somewhere else, to be continued, which then leads us into possibly the most extraordinary track on the album, this incredible thing at the end, the Bewley Brothers, which is a real cult favorite among fans. Many people cite it as among possibly a contender for the best ever Bowie song, because it's so mysterious and so beguiling. And David talked about it in later years and explained that while all the other tracks on Hunky Dory had been demoed and prepared, this one just sort of popped into his head one day, more or less, and he rushed back to the studio with you, Ken, and you sort of laid it down together to start with, just the two of you. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, he came in and he said, we're going to record another song. Okay, fine. He said, it's called the Bewley Brothers, but don't take any notice of the lyrics. Now, I've never been a lyric person. I'm very much the melody. That's what's important to me. What they're singing about, I generally get it wrong anyway. I mishear the lyrics, so they never make too much sense to me. And I said, well, why shouldn't I listen to the lyrics? He said, well, let me just preface this by, we had just gone through the whole Paul is dead thing. America picking up on all of these things that had nothing to do with anything and deciding that McCartney was dead and it was now a stand-in. So David said, I wrote the lyrics specifically for the American market to see what they would read them as being. They don't actually mean anything. And the Bewley Brothers came from, there was a chain of tobacconists.
Yeah.
Which I believe, if I remember correctly, one of them was on Wardour Street or just around that area. And he walked past that tobacconist, saw Bewley Brothers, and came in, and that was it.
They made pipes, didn't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
So now I've heard so many different versions of what those lyrics mean, and David agreed with quite a few of them. I know.
Yeah. This, of course, was part of his sort of methodology, wasn't it? He loved it when people, you know, as he put it, explained to him what his songs meant.
It's interesting because he was so close with Lou Reed, and Lou was very much, he never listens to what anyone ever says about his songs. You take what you get from them, and that's it. It has not, he doesn't care. He knows what his meaning was. He doesn't care what other people think the meaning is. Whereas David, he would take, oh yeah, that's what I meant. Oh yeah, that's what I meant. He would sort of go with all of those things, the complete opposite.
Yeah. I mean, he's at the risk of being pretentious. Wow. He as a lyricist, he strikes me, particularly in this period, actually, as being very much in the tradition of English poets of the 20th century, people like T.S. Eliot, who would think nothing of taking a found symbol or a phrase from something else, a little bit of Shakespeare, a little bit of something else, and sort of mixing it all up together and creating something new, but something which the person who reads it, what they make of it is every bit as valid as what the writer may or may not have had in their head when they wrote it. And that's part of David's methodology as a lyricist, I think. So the Bewley Brothers is kind of the epitome of that.
Gentlemen, I'm going to literally leave you for 2 minutes because I've been so influenced by what's been said. I've now got to go to a small room and do some...
And clap a little.
And do some clapping,
yes.
And do some
I'll be back after I've clapped a little.
Okay.
No, that thing of taking bits and pieces lyrically, musically, that was David. He always described, he looked at it himself as being a chef, a cook. He would take this little piece from Indian food and this little bit from Chinese food and mix them all together, and it would come up being his. And it was exactly the same musically. That a great example of that, moving on to Ziggy for a second, is Moonish Daydream, the solo on that. There was a hit in it may have been early 60s or late 50s, a group called the Hollywood Argyles.
Right, yeah.
And the B-side of their hit was a song called Sure Know Enough About Love. And one of the main line through it was a baritone and a flute playing. And David loved that sound. And so he wanted to try and emulate that sound to a point. On the solo of Moonish Daydream, we used a baritone and a recorder, not a school recorder.
This is the sort of the that bit.
Yeah. And that's just sound-wise or feel-wise is taken completely from that early record, the Hollywood Argyles B-side.
Yeah. Well, and of course the Hollywood Argyles pop up on this album as well, don't they? Because again, it's the sort of, it's that kind of take a little bit that you like the sound of thing. It's a lyric in Life on Mars. The line "Look at those cavemen go" is nicked straight off a Hollywood Argyles song called "Alley Oop" about a caveman.
That was the A side of the single.
That was the A side of the same single. So that single has quite a bit to answer for. Yeah, and it's I mean it's terrific that, you know, David was a big fan, wasn't he? He was a fan of other people's music and films and literature, and he loved. He had a voracious appetite for it all, and whatever little bits and bobs and echoes and things that he liked, they would end up coming back into his work in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. So moving on from Hunky Dory, then, I mean, the Ziggy Stardust sessions, the two albums were almost made back to back, weren't they? I mean, there was a little gap between, but you were straight back in the studio again at Trident, really not long afterwards.
Right. Well, David, I saw David on the in the studio at some point, and he said, "We're going to record another album." I said, "You've got to be joking. Hunky Dory hasn't even come out yet." He said, "No, they want to finalize a record deal." His management wanted to finalize a record deal, and so they wanted another album to show that I can keep it up, kind of thing. And so he said, "I don't think you're going to like this one." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, it's going to be more rock and roll. I want it more." And I can't remember exactly what he said, but I think he said, "I want it more Velvet Underground and Iggy Pop." I had no idea who either of those acts were at that time, so it didn't mean anything to me, and he was completely wrong. Of course, I loved the album, but it's one of those things. As an album, for me, as an album, Ziggy holds together better than anything I did with him as a complete entity. But I think there are better tracks on Hunky Dory and Aladdin Sane than some of the ones on Ziggy.
Oh, that's interesting. That's very interesting. I mean, they're such different beasts, aren't they? But I know what you mean. Ziggy holds together in a very sort of compact. Everything kind of fits together beautifully like a jigsaw. It's just right. Whereas the others are perhaps a bit more sort of ventilated. They have sort of straggly edges to them in a way. Yeah. But I mean, great albums all. So yeah, as you say, you were kind of halfway through Ziggy practically before Hunky Dory was even released. Hunky Dory came out not long before Christmas in '71, and then Ziggy was completed in early '72. But you were already, well on the way with it.
But completed because we had to go back in to do a single, because we'd recorded Round and Round, the Chuck Berry song, and put that in the album. And RCA said, we don't hear a single, we need another song. So we went back in, recorded Starman, and history was made.
Yeah, that's in itself, that's an extraordinary story. So David just sort of, Starman popped out one day and he said, okay, here's a single. I mean, he was moving at warp speed at this point, wasn't he? I mean, incredible. So yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary to think that one of David's most famous songs, and indeed the hit that kind of relaunched him in '72, was almost an afterthought to replace a Chuck Berry cover. That's amazing, isn't it?
Of course, because of that song, there's also this whole thing about Ziggy being a concept album, which it never was.
Yeah,
there are 3 songs that sort of go together that way, and then Starman sort of coming in, but it was just an album of songs. And as I think it can be seen by It Ain't Easy being in there, which had nothing to do with it, and also the fact that we'd originally done Round and Round.
And I think, wasn't Amsterdam also at one point going to be on that album as well? I think
we recorded it. I don't think we ever actually thought it was going to be on the album, but we just recorded it to have for a B-side or something like that.
Right. Yeah. But again, I suppose it's a bit like we were saying about the Bowie brothers. Once the album was put together and given that marvelous title, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, obviously people were going to run with that and construct a sort of concept around it, because it felt like it ought to have one. And hey presto, it got one. That's what it did with it. Yeah.
That's rather nice though, Nick, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's wonderful.
It's lovely when fans and people who love the music and love it get hold of something and then take it to another stage that they can associate with. I think that's rather lovely that was done. I mean, the title obviously helped. It didn't do any harm.
Absolutely.
But I thought it was rather nice when people sort of take something and get a whole new meaning. I mean, John Anderson in Yes was another one. I mean, I've been with John, and I remember one particular occasion where somebody came up and said, I've worked out exactly what the song Your Move's all about. And John went, oh yeah, really? What's that then? And he said, it's, and he went on about the different planes in the universe where we went and in our afterlives and how we came back and all that. This went on for about 10 minutes. And he said to John, am I right? And John went, yep. And off he went. And I said, is it? And John went, no, it's about a chess game. If that's what he wants it to mean, that's fine by me.
Yeah. And that is absolutely lovely, as you say.
And you can do that with a lot of David's songs. I think the irony is that at this present moment in time, since they've recently discovered water on Mars, which almost certainly means 3 billion years ago there was some sort of life, he's going to become a prophet.
Yes, I guess so. It's only once we can get out there and start turning a profit on it. Yeah. Talking of Mars, Rick, you have recently you've got a new album out, haven't you? Which is called The Red Planet. Is that right? Well, I said
I'm on the Red Planet. I'm fascinated with space, and I'm part of a setup which I am convinced if David was still with us, he'd want to be a part of, called Starmus, which is run. I was introduced to a guy called Garrick Israelian and Professor Stephen Hawkins by Brian May, who's also a professor of astrophysics. And they do this festival every 2 years, which is where all the great astronauts and all the great astrophysicists get together and they meet and they do lectures for people. And then at the end of it, they have a concert. of course, because of Brian. And I've done it for a few years. I've done it with Hans Zimmer, with my own band, with Brian, Steve Vai, a lot of people. And this is going to sound funny, the lectures are amazing as well. I sat through an hour-and-a-half lecture by Professor Stephen Hawkins, and I can put my hand on my heart and tell you that I didn't understand one word, but it was absolutely riveting. And I've sat through lectures by Alexander Leonov, who was the first Russian to walk in space, sadly no longer with us, and became friends with him. Marvelous, marvelous character, and they all love music. I played at one of the concerts. I played Space Oddity live with Chris Hadfield, who was the astronaut, the Canadian astronaut who played it up in the space station. In fact, the guitar he played on is still there. It's too difficult to bring it back. So, you know, when it finally breaks up, it'll break up with it. But the Mars, for obvious reasons, has always fascinated me. And Garrick Israeli and I was talking to him, and he said, well, we've got so many great pictures from the last few years now, and there's 3 missions, in fact, on their way there now that will be arriving around about end of March. And they reckon that that's going to almost certainly prove that there was some form of life, whichever way it could be a single cell, it could be something, is there, because there is water underneath the thing. And yeah, I did an album because it fascinated me, and the new photographs that they've got are just like you're there. You can take photos of, and it is the closest thing. 2-3 billion years ago, it was like Earth. It was a blue planet. It wasn't a red planet at all. And I think that there is something about life on Mars that I think Bowie fans, which include me, of course, heavily, will go nuts if in April, when they get all the data back, they go, yes, there was. Absolutely brilliant. He'll be then claimed that one of the biggest prophets ever.
Yeah, I was going to say a certain record will definitely get a bit of airplay.
Cool, not much.
Oh yeah, so 50 years on, you've made an album about Mars again. It continues to exert that fascination. But yeah, let's look back 50 years again, just finally, because gosh, we've been talking for an hour and a half now, and it's been thrilling every step of the way. So 50 years on, this album, which we now know to be one of, not just one of David's best albums, but one of the great albums of all time. How can we sum up Hunky Dory? I'm going to ask you to do so instead of me. Ken, how does it stand in your career and in your view of pop music over the years?
Oh, it's astounding. It started a whole new career for me, let's face it. So just on a personal level like that, it's just astounding. Still, I try and listen to my own work as little as possible, but I have to admit, Life on Mars, I do get to hear it a lot because I give talks throughout the world now on my career, and sometimes just on David, and I break down the multi-track of Life on Mars. And so just get to hear some of Rick's piano just on its own. And just every time I hear it, I get chills at the back of my neck. It is such a beautiful piece. Just the piano part, forget everything else that goes on top of it. Just, yeah, it's amazing. And to think that before I got involved with it, I thought, oh, well, David's a nice guy, but he's never going to be a superstar. No.
How wrong could you be? But how wonderfully wrong! What a great thing to be wrong about. Yeah, and amazing. And Rick, you've worked on, as like Ken, you've worked on so many fabulous projects over the years. Where does Hunky Dory slot into your sort of timeline? What does it mean to you?
Sometimes when people ask me, I say it's the greatest example as to why music should never have a date stamped on it, because that album, I've got teenage grandchildren, and they love it, and that's nothing to do with me. And I've had, well, one of my grandchildren, she's 15, said to me, "Granddad, are you Richard Wakeman?" Well, Grandpa Grumpy, they call me. Grandpa Grumpy, are you Richard? I said, why? They said, on the back of an album called Hunky Dory, which we've just done, it says that Richard. I said, yeah, that's David called me Richard because he knew my mum called me Richard, so that's why he wrote it as Richard. He knew I hated being called Richard. He knew my mum called it, and he said, if it's good enough for your mum, it's good enough for me. But I said, it's a great album. My wife, who we've been married for oh, God knows how many years, but we've been together for 19 years. She was born in 1974. And she loves Hunky Dory, and we'd been together about a year or so, and Life on Mars came on the radio. She said, "Oh, that's just such a great track." She said, "It's my favourite album of all time." I said, "You weren't even born when it was made." She said, "It doesn't matter," and that was a great example to me. She said, "You like it?" I said, "Yeah," and she said, "Did you ever meet him?" I said, "Yeah," and I said, do you have the album? She said, well, I've got the CD. I said, do you ever read? She said, I can never read what's written on the CDs. I said, let me show you the album. And she said a similar words to the words that Mick used when she went, oh, you see it? I said, yeah. And that just cemented our love, I suppose. But there's people of all ages like that album and will continue to like that album. As I said to you right at the beginning, long after none of us are here, and we can go out there with Dave and go, they're still listening, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful point on which to end on this amazing album, which is indeed still Hunky Dory after all these years. It's been wonderful talking to you both. Thank you so much for sharing all your memories. Ken Scott and Rick Wakeman, thank you very much indeed for joining us at the Dublin Bowie Festival.
Thank you, and I hope everyone's enjoyed the week.
Yeah,
it's absolutely brilliant, and it's great to renew friendship with Ken again.
Yeah.
I have lots of happy memories. I really have.
We've got each other's emails now, so
we have. Yeah, make sure we keep in touch and everything. Yeah. Absolutely brilliant.
Okay,
excellent. Well, thank you both very much, gentlemen, and yes, goodbye, Dublin. Thank you for watching.
Bye.
Bye.
It's a god-awful small affair to the girl with the mousy hair, but her mommy is yelling no, and her daddy has told her to go, but her friend is nowhere to be seen. Now she's walking through a sunken dream to the seat with the clearest view, and she's hooked to the silver screen. But the film is a saddening bore, for she's lived it 10 times or more. She could spit in the eyes of fools as they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those cavemen go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the lawman beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, wonder if he'll ever know he's in the best-selling show. Is the life on Mars? America's tortured brow that Mickey Mouse has grown up a cow, and now the workers have struck for fame, 'cause London's on sale again. And see the mice in their million hordes from Ibiza to the Norfolk boards. Rule Britannia is out of bounds to my mother, my dog and clowns. But the film is a saddening bore, 'cause I wrote it 10 times or more. It's about to be writ again, as I ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, you look at those cavemen go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the lawman beating up the wrong guy. Whoa man, I wonder if he'll ever know. He's in the best-selling show. He's alive on Mars.